सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There's been much demand from so many of you that I speak about the current lot of leaks that are coming out of the US. There are leaks coming out of US intelligence agencies, Pentagon, essentially from the Pentagon, the US defense system. And most of these leaks are about Ukraine, or they are related to the war in Ukraine. And there's been much controversy about it. Now, the one reason I haven't spoken about it as yet, in spite of so many suggestions from you and demands and orders from you, which I usually would not be so complacent about, is because I have myself been cluttered in my head about a bunch of things. Number one, how important are these things? Because so much comes out on the war in Ukraine that almost anything that is claimed to be new sometimes sounds like you've read this before or you've seen this before. Second, how authentic are these? How authentic are these leaks? Are these leaks as in leaks of genuine information, or are these disinformation? Third, who's done it? What are the motives? Fourth, does it really matter? Will it affect the ongoing war or the ongoing diplomacy or ongoing geostrategic issues? And fifth, most importantly, what is the motive of whoever has done it? For which you need to know, first of all, who is it who could have done it? So I've been waiting for some clarity on this, because again, the same old questions come up. How is this different from Snowden or Julian Assange? Were those more important? Is this more important? Now, one major difference is that this is about an ongoing war, where both tactical and strategic issues are involved militarily, but also diplomatically and geostrategically, key issues are involved. Now, what is it that gave me the confidence today to talk about this? It's not just because I'm in Bombay or Mumbai, as you can see. It is because I read an article in the Washington Post, an opinion article by David Ignatius, who is one of the wisest columnists on these issues. And he, in fact, he put these revelations or these leaks in perspective. And he put this in perspective by, in fact, raising more questions about them and raising more questions which are analytical, which is that you have to first try and see what these mean, what is the implication, and then guess who could have been behind these leaks, and then arrive at some conclusion. So to begin with, I'll pick up two quotes from David Ignatius' article, of which I'm sharing a link with you. And these are not quotes from what he's saying. These are quotes that he's used to make his larger argument. So his second quote, which he uses in his conclusion, is what I'm going to use first. And that is a quote from Winston Churchill in 1943. So in 1943, with Second World War at its peak, Winston Churchill said, and I quote, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Right? The truth is so precious that she should be attended by a bodyguard of lies. So these leaks, if they are true, that means in wartime, if this truth has come out, is this attended to by a bodyguard of lies, or have these truths just leaked out? Again, there is no certainty. If you ask me, from whatever I am reading, it does look like these truths have just leaked out, because from what has come out today, and there are lots of stories, including Reuters, all the international media is now saying that these leaks are the handiwork actually of a very young gun enthusiast who was working at one of the American bases, where he had access to a lot of this data, and he put it on one of these discrete or encrypted discussion groups, mainly to show off to other gun enthusiasts. So he shared this data or these pages which he downloaded from secret documents to show off to about 2 to 3 dozen other gun enthusiasts. So this is a young guy who's controversial, who's young, but who's in some ways who's a bit like any other gun enthusiast in his kind of age group. So a lot of the language he uses is anti-Semitic, sort of very right-wing, extreme right-wing language. So if he's somebody who actually chanced upon these documents and leaked them just to show off, we don't know. I'm sure prosecutions will take place in America. High-level investigations have been ordered. Now, we have to see, first of all, I list for you the highlights of these leaks. Highlights which are relevant to what's going on in Ukraine today and what's going on in global diplomacy and geostrategy around Ukraine today or emanating from Ukraine. First of all, these documents tell us that while NATO and the US claim that they have not put any boots on the ground, they have put some boots on the ground. Now, this is only 90 pairs of boots, but it's still soldiers, mainly special forces soldiers and special forces trainers from the US and NATO countries. And once again, which is the country which has the largest contingent among these 90? It is Britain. Britain has 50 out of these 90. Britain has 50, US has 14, and lo and behold, France has 15. So France, where Macron has just been lecturing the whole world and lecturing all of Europe in during his China visit, saying Europe should not be a vassal of America and Europe should have an autonomous strategic policy. He's been distancing himself, maybe for domestic consumption for his audiences, from the American or NATO plans in some ways in Europe and in Ukraine. In fact, he has a larger contingent of special forces trainers in Ukraine than even the Americans. So 50 for Britain, 14 for America, 15 for France. Number two, these documents give you in great details, Ukrainian infrastructure, the state of Ukrainian defensive infrastructure, and it tells you what Ukraine is running short of, and also the state of preparedness of Ukrainian forces. So these documents tell us, for example, that the counter-offensive that the Ukrainians are supposedly preparing for a long time, 12 brigades are supposedly under training and preparation and under re-equipment for this counter-offensive, late spring or early summer counter-offensive. These documents tell us that these brigades are not yet battle ready. In fact, in the case of some of those brigades, training has not even begun. Then it tells you a fairly dismal situation with Ukrainian air defenses, Ukrainian missile stocks, and these assessments say that even if there's a counter-offensive later this year, late spring, early summer by Ukraine, it can only yield minor territorial gains. It's not going to be able to push the Russians away from a large chunk of Ukrainian soil that they've occupied, and definitely not from Crimea, which seems to be the big prize right now. Again, these documents have estimates of casualties. Now, the Americans so far in their propaganda, in their leaks, etc., have been saying that more than 200,000, more than 2 lakh Russian casualties have taken place. Casualties, remember, does not necessarily mean all dead. That is fatalities. These documents, in fact, show the estimates, the secret estimates, American intelligence estimates, to be not far from what's been leaked so far. So they estimate Russian casualties to be between 1,89,000 to 2,23,000. Again, casualties. Fatalities, that is deaths. These documents estimate, or US intelligence estimates, Russian fatalities, military deaths at 43,000. 43,000, by the way, is a lot of people. Generally, I would say it's about 3 times of the number of soldiers that the Soviet Union, the big Soviet Union, which had more than twice the population that Russia has right now, more than 3 times the soldiers they lost in an Afghan war that lasted just about a decade. So this is a lot of casualties for a country with just over 13 crore population. But look at Ukraine on the other hand. It's not as if Ukraine is doing brilliantly. Now, it may have suited the Americans and NATO not to have this fact come out, but these documents also tell us that the Ukrainians have suffered heavy casualties too. And Ukrainians, if anything, have 1/3 the population, about 1/3, everything is ballpark, about 1/3 the population of Russia. So what are Ukrainian casualties? Ukrainian casualties, again, casualties. I know a lot of our popular media, particularly TV, uses casualties as synonymous with fatalities. That's not true. A soldier hit in the leg, hit in the arm, hit in the shoulder, hit anywhere but who survived and who's under treatment is a casualty but not a fatality. So Ukrainian casualties, 1.24 lakhs to 1.31 lakhs. So it's lower than Russia. Normally, you would have thought that because Ukrainians are the defenders, they are well dug in, their casualty should be a lot lower than Russia's. They are lower, but they are not that much lower. So for a small population of just about 4 crore people, 1.24 to 1.31 lakh killed or wounded is a lot of casualties. Of this, the US intelligence estimates Ukrainian dead as about 17,500. Once again, to put this in perspective, 17,500 dead soldiers killed in action is more than all the soldiers we lost in three of our biggest wars. That is the 1962 war with China, 1965 war with Pakistan, 1971 war again with Pakistan. You can also throw in Kargil there, right? All of that together will just come to maybe a bit less than 17,500. So little Ukraine has lost that many people. Then you have these very interesting stories coming out of this. And as I read out the details, you will figure it out. Why do I say that this sounds like a plot from that Sriram Raghavan's film, Johnny Gadar? I don't know if you saw it. Johnny Gadar is a movie which has a bunch of these iconic crooks who are all working together to make a whole bunch of money, but each one is trying to backstab the other. So he gets all the money, right? So some of that's happening in global diplomacy and global uh, geostrategic affairs also right now. You don't know, allies are double crossing allies, right? Allies are making friends with enemies. Enemies are double crossing their allies. So all kinds of funny things are happening. So just keep noting what I'm saying. So first of all, Egypt. Egypt, which is an American ally, treaty-bound American ally, Egypt at one point, that is the LCC government, that is supposed to have given a secret clearance to manufacture 40,000 rockets to be sold to Russia. That is to be sold to the party that is opposed to your own ally. America is Egypt's ally, or Egypt is America's ally, right? Americans love the LCC government, right? And yet, because nobody wants to give up the opportunity or lose the opportunity to buy an IOU with another big power, that is Russia, and Egypt has had an old relationship with Russia. They still have some equipment from Russia. In fact, they were on the verge of buying some more equipment from Russia. That stopped under pressure after the war began. So Egypt has denied it, but it's deeply embarrassing for the Egyptian government to be told through American secret documents that their president authorized the building of or the manufacture of 40,000 rockets, not missiles, not guided, 40,000 rockets to be sold to Russia, which is short of ammunition. Both sides are short of ammunition. Next, South Korea. Now, South Korea is an American ally also, a treaty-bound ally. So usually you would expect them to help the war effort, and you would expect them to do what the Americans want them to do. But the South Koreans have been torn because they have a law, their constitution prohibits them from selling arms or selling any weapons to any country involved in war. So much as the Americans may want them to sell at least ammunition to the Ukrainians, they can't do it under their law and constitution. So the pressure has been on them to maybe make third-party sales. So sell to Poland, Poland will then give to Ukraine. In fact, if you see the stories today international news organizations, international news agencies have broken the story. Also, American publications, European publications have broken the story that South Korea has most likely agreed to produce 5 lakh shells for artillery firing, because Ukraine is so short of them, but they will not sell them to Ukraine. They will not sell them to Poland either. America will give their own shells from their own war wastage reserves to Ukraine. To replenish those reserves, South Korea will manufacture these and sell these to America. Now, once again, that's one more way of getting around the sanctions. You could have got away with it if it had not become public, but now these intelligence leaks have taken place. This has become public. So this deeply embarrasses South Korea and also America as well. But in this case, I suspect more South Korea than America. Then you have Serbia. Now, Serbia is one of those Slavic countries which feels close to Russia, close to Putin's Russia, and it's not just a proximity on racial basis, right? It's not just ethnic. It's also because of many other shared common and military interests. Serbia uses a lot of Russian origin equipment, and so far Serbia has refused to join in the American-led sanctions against Russia. At the same time, these leaked secrets tell us that Serbia also most likely has been selling weapons to Kiev, while in public defying sanctions on Russia, saying we are autonomous, Russia is our friend, we will not let them down. They are selling weapons to Russia's enemy in an active war. So this is the reason I called it like a plot from Johnny Gadar. Everybody is together in one place, so pretends to be together, but is quite happy to be working against each other's interests there. Then you have Hungary. Now, Hungary, no, I know we've spoken about Hungary. We dedicated a full episode of Cut The Clutter to Hungary and Viktor Orban. It is an elected dictatorship. He's destroyed his free media. He's done many things that no democracies would do, although unfortunately, many democracies now, many elected leaders across the democratic world see him, Erdogan, as role models now, that you can get elected, get your legitimacy, and then do all kinds of awful things. So he's one of those characters. His country is a member of NATO, but he's also friends with Russia. He is also is somebody who defies many of the other NATO regulations and rules, including giving refuge to people who are suffering in their own countries, particularly say in Syria and other places. He's shut his doors to refugees. He takes no refugees. Absolutely not. That is completely non-European or anti-European, but it does it. In this case, Hungary, which is a member of NATO, treaty-bound ally of the Americans, it comes out that Hungarian president has listed America among his three topmost enemies, among his three topmost adversaries. So the senior-most, the most powerful of my treaty where I feel secure, but again also happens to be my most important adversary. Then you have some other interesting sidelights. For example, there's one story on how Russian hackers, and it's the first example of Russian hackers successfully doing it, Russian hackers actually being able to subvert Canadian gas pipelines. Remember, it is not that gas pipeline which was going into the Nordic countries, which were subverted, and story came out later, Seymour Hersh's story, that maybe it was a CIA operation. We don't know about that, but this is not that pipeline. This is the first example of Russian hackers getting involved in this business on behalf of the Russian state in the war effort and subverting Canadian gas pipelines. And then, and then there are four wildcard scenarios. So what is it that intelligence agencies do most of all? They do scenario writing, because when you write scenarios, you can't be proven wrong, right? You can always say, but this was a scenario. I was wargaming. I was using guesswork. And if you want to be even safer, you do more than one scenario, right? Ek mein ek jeetega, ek mein ek jeetega. One scenario will say A will win. One scenario will say A will lose. One scenario will say B will win, B will lose. Okay, there can be a third scenario that it will be a draw, it will be a stalemate. So what they have done is they've done four scenarios. At least four scenarios have leaked as part of these leaks. Four scenarios, four wildcard scenarios. So the first scenario, maybe Zelensky would die while the war is going on, somebody would kill him. Maybe Putin will die. Maybe there'll be a removal. Maybe there'll be a big commotion in the Russian armed forces leadership, and this leadership will be replaced by some others. Or maybe Zelensky will find wherewithal to carry out some kind of a raid on the Kremlin, which can lead to a much bigger escalation in fighting. Now, I don't know how much bigger an escalation can take place besides what's going on, but all these are possibilities that are being discussed. Again, secret documents, and this will, if this document is accurate, as it seems to be, looks like this will embarrass the American intelligence system, because this will betray the fact that they have a lot of insights into the Chinese system as well. So this says that China tested a hypersonic glide weapon some time back, which traveled for 12 minutes over 2100 kilometers. It was a DF-27 glide vehicle, and it had the capability of bypassing or hoodwinking American anti-missile system, or even American anti-hypersonic missile system. Once again, there is operational stuff that is quote unquote leaked. For example, Russian General Gerasimov's plans or his training for his troops on how to fight NATO tanks. If NATO gives large bodies of its tanks to the Ukrainians for their offenses, that he will set up fire zones, trap them in fire zones like killing grounds, as infantry might call them, fire zones, or killing grounds, and also to teach his soldiers about the vulnerabilities of NATO tanks. So all this is the stuff that has come out. The question is, what does all this add up to? So the second quote that David Ignatius uses is from James Angleton. James Angleton used to be the chief of counterintelligence at CIA when David says he was 28 years old and a young reporter. So he is obviously one of those legendary characters from the Cold War era. So James Angleton, who's described by the author here, the walking definition of the word eccentric, right? I mean, if you were the counterintelligence chief at the CIA at the peak of the Cold War, chances are you were not a regular guy. In this case, he is described as a walking definition of an eccentric. So the quote from him is, it doesn't matter whether a spy was a double agent or a triple agent as long as you knew the difference, which means as long as you knew what was for real and what was a lie, or what was being planted on you with a purpose, or what was the truth. In this case, what is a genuine leak, what is a plant, and if it's a leak, who's leaked it and why? All these are the questions that will help us put these leaks in perspective. So there are about 3 or 4 key highlights, analytical highlights here. One, were these leaks made by the Russians? Now there's a lot of speculation going on. So the first speculation is that these leaks, Russians got access, Russians spy on the Americans also. They are very effective at it. So they got this stuff out of the American system and they've leaked it. They've leaked it to show Ukrainian vulnerabilities. So the Ukrainian armed forces get demoralized and also Ukraine's backers get demoralized, or they lose steam. Because what is Russia's hope? Russia's hope is that at some point of time, and what is Russia's plus China's hope, that at some time America and the Western world, the European world will get tired of the war. And once they get bored with the war, then, because Putin will never get bored with the war, Putin will then carry on and ultimately get a resolution that he wants in Ukraine. So that is one possibility, that first of all, this was vacuum cleaned by the Russians and then it was deliberately leaked by the Russians. The second discussion point is that were they actually disseminated by Ukraine? And Ignatius also raises that point, that maybe Ukrainians did it. Ukrainians did it, number one, to trap the Russians into believing that Ukrainians are not as strong as they might believe them. So they take more chances, and you can count on Russians being a little bit not very bright in this war, the way they started the war by piling up all those hundreds or several hundreds of armored vehicles on a highway, right, like sitting ducks without any infantry. You would not put it past them, or Ukrainians would have some reason to believe that Russians can be fooled again. So maybe the Ukrainians are leaking it themselves to trap the Russians. So Russians then underestimate them and maybe fling more forces in or take them lightly and suffer. This is a possibility that's been greatly debated by Russian military bloggers. Russian military bloggers, by the way, are a very good source of what's coming out of Russia and how is Russia seeing the war. And all this stuff, don't worry about language. All this work on encrypted telegraph channels and elsewhere is now fully and freely being translated. So if you're interested in that war, you can follow it quite closely. Next possibility is this has been leaked by a disgruntled American with some motive now. That we've seen that happen with Assange, we've seen that happen with Snowden. So maybe it is something like that. But again, we don't know. But the fact is that the next debate, that are these genuine or are these fake? From whatever has come out right now, it looks like that most of the information in these leaks is actually genuine. It does not mean that the American intelligence assessments are right. Intelligence assessments can always go wrong. But what is now quite widely believed worldwide is that these leaks are genuine documents. What's been leaked, the documents that have been leaked are genuine. Again, back to Ignatius's argument, and he says in Angleton's words, and I quote, this is the wilderness of mirrors, right? Wilderness of mirrors. You have mirrors all around you, seeing many images. You have to make sense of it, right? That's what he means in the first place when he says it didn't matter if a spy was a double agent or a triple agent as long as you knew the difference. So you've got all these multiple mirrors. And he then translates this metaphor, the wilderness of mirrors, Angleton's metaphor. And he says what matters is that you know what's accurate and what is a manipulated reflection. right? These are the uncertainties with these documents. Of course, Ignatius thinks that that while a few documents look doctored, most look real. And he says in the world of espionage, this is what science called epistemology. Epistemology, as we know, is the science of knowing how we know what we know, right? We might know something, right? But there has to be logic to knowing that. So that science is epistemology. So what we know in this case is the leaks. These leaks are visible to us. We can see them. But how do we know what we know will answer the question of how much do these leaks matter. So once again, to sum up, if you look at this, all of these documents, they tell you something which is logical and which is something that generally the global military press, the global strategic affairs writers, including in the West or especially in the West, know that Ukraine's forces are also depleting heavily, that both sides are engaged in a depleting war that's causing a lot of attrition. The question is, who can sustain it for longer? It's also evident that Ukraine is firing its missiles, particularly its surface-to-air missiles, its air defense missiles, SAM-10s and SAM-11s. India knows those missiles. Those are available in India as well. So these are missiles that Ukraine uses. These are the only missiles Ukraine has above 20,000 feet of altitude for a plane flying at that level. It is because of these flights right now that Russian fighter planes, combat planes are not coming into Ukrainian airspace. But these estimates tell you that one set of missiles, SAM-11s, Ukrainians will run out, say, in a month. The other set maybe in a month and a half, in which case Ukrainians will be denuded of air defense and Russian Air Force once again can get air superiority. Now, you know for sure that there is no way the US and NATO will let that happen. So could it also be that these leaks have been made to also work on public opinion, Congress, etc., so that all the sanctions are in place? Once again, we don't know. But there cannot be any doubt that Ukrainians are tiring, Russians are tiring. At this moment, there is depletion on both sides, there is attrition on both sides. And it's a question of which side loses the will to fight first, which in turn would depend on which side runs out of the material to keep on fighting first. And that is the West's concern about Ukraine. And that is Russia's concern about itself and Russia's friends' concern about itself. In fact, in these leaked documents, I will tell you the one thing I would have wished to see, but it's not there. I would have wished to see some assessment on how, how the Americans believe likely it is that the Chinese will start supplying at least consumables of war, at least ammunition to the Russians. Because if they ever did that, that would make this war almost interminable. Then Putin could go on for a very long time. We don't know that, and those are the uncertainties of this war. I will conclude this by using a line that Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee often used, because whenever a question came on starting a war with Pakistan, and there were occasions, there was Kargil, there was Parliament attack, Parakram, when there was a lot of pressure to start a war, and he would say, when you start a war, where you start a war, how you start a war, that is in your hands. How will the war end? Where will the war end? When the war will end is not in your hands. So this war, almost 14 months after it started, is a living example of that argument.